The first thing Clara noticed was the way every head turned when she walked into the churchyard. Her dress was simple, cream-colored, the best she could afford, but she still felt the weight of whispers trailing behind her. She had agreed to this madness only because she couldn't stand the thought of facing her ex-husband alone, him flaunting his new bride, him smirking as though she'd never mattered. Beside her, Ethan adjusted his hat, the brim shadowing a scar along his cheek. He wasn't her boyfriend, not even someone she truly knew, just the single dad who lived 2 farms down, the man she'd asked in a moment of desperation. He'd said yes without hesitation, though his eyes gave nothing away. His little daughter, Mary, had even pressed a ribbon into Clara's palm before they left, whispering, "For luck." Now, standing before the church steps where laughter and music spilled out, Clara's knees almost buckled. Through the open doors, she saw her ex, William, straight-backed and proud, his arm around a woman draped in lace. He looked every bit the triumphant groom, as though the years he'd spent breaking Clara's spirit had never happened. Ethan leaned close, his voice low so only she could hear. "Hold your chin up. You don't owe him your tears today." She tried to smile, but it wavered. The scent of flowers mixed with pipe smoke, the sound of a fiddle warming up for the dance, and all of it pressed heavy on her chest. She felt the sting of humiliation waiting to spill. But when they entered the hall, silence rippled. William's smirk faltered, and Clara realized why Ethan had come so willingly, why his presence was solid as oak beside her. The secret lay in the way William's bride turned pale at the sight of Ethan, the way her eyes darted, guilty and afraid. Something tied the 3 of them together, something Clara hadn't known until now. And whatever it was, it cut deeper than all the years of betrayal she thought she'd endured. The church bells rang in steady peals, but to Clara they sounded like hammers striking her ribs. She stood at Ethan's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and for the first time in years she was the one being watched. Whispers floated through the rows of benches as neighbors craned their necks. They had all expected Clara to come alone, shoulders bowed, another chapter of humiliation for William to savor. Instead, she arrived with the quietest man in town, the widower who kept to himself and raised his little girl with a kind of steady patience. William's eyes narrowed as he spotted them. His smile faltered, though he tried to recover quickly, clutching the bride closer. She was young, younger than Clara by at least 5 years, with golden hair arranged in perfect curls. Yet her fingers trembled against the lace of her gown as she stared at Ethan. Clara caught it, how the color drained from the girl's face. A shiver moved up her spine, confusion knotting with the old ache of betrayal. Ethan didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, his scar pulling faintly as his gaze locked with the bride's. Something unspoken passed between them, something that made Clara's pulse race. The ceremony began, the preacher's voice rolling through scripture, but Clara heard none of it. She was too aware of Ethan's stillness beside her, of William's prideful stance, and of the bride's darting glances that betrayed fear more than joy. When the vows were spoken, Clara looked away, unable to bear the weight of old wounds reopening. She thought of the nights William had broken her down with words sharp as whips, of the way he'd left her when she no longer amused him. She had come here only to prove to herself that she could stand tall again. Yet, what she saw now was a different story unraveling, a hidden thread that tied Ethan and William's bride together. At the reception, with lanterns glowing and fiddle music rising, Clara tried to breathe steady. Guests drank, laughed and clapped in rhythm, but at the center table, William's bride hardly touched her food. She glanced often toward Ethan, and once, when she thought no one was watching, her lips moved soundlessly as if she were begging. Ethan leaned closer to Clara, his voice low and even. "There are things you don't know, Things you deserve to hear, but not here.
Not with all these eyes. Clara's hand froze on the rim of her cup.
She didn't understand, not yet, but something deep inside told her that the truth waiting to be spoken would hurt more than all the lies William had ever told her. The lanterns swung in the evening breeze, throwing shadows across the wooden beams of the reception hall.
Laughter rose and fell like the tide. Glasses clinked. Boots tapped against the floorboards.
Clara sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, while beside her, Ethan remained a steady presence, saying little, watching much. William basked in the attention, raising his glass again and again, loud with the arrogance that had once made Clara feel so small. But every time his new bride tried to smile, her eyes betrayed her. They kept straying always toward Ethan. Clara noticed. So did others. And soon the whispers began. Finally, unable to bear the silence stretching between them, Clara leaned close to Ethan. "Tell me what this is. Why does she look at you that way?" Ethan's eyes were fixed on the young woman in white. His voice was low, almost drowned out by the fiddle's tune.
Because once before William...
She belonged to someone else. Clara's chest tightened. She followed his gaze, her breath catching as the bride's trembling hand slipped against her cup. The truth hung there, heavy and unbearable. It was during the toasts that the moment cracked open.
A neighbor, drunk and bold, stood and shouted across the tables.
"Funny, ain't it, William?
Your bride can't take her eyes off another man."
The hall erupted in uneasy laughter. William's jaw clenched, his pride burning hotter than the lantern light. The bride went pale. She looked as though she might collapse. Then, before William could bark a reply, she rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood. Her voice, thin and quivering, carried through the room. "I never wanted this." The laughter died. Silence fell like a blade. Clara's breath caught, the world narrowing to the young woman's shaking frame. William shot to his feet, red with fury. "Sit down," but she didn't. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she turned toward Ethan. "Tell them."
"Tell her, before I lose the courage." The hall was frozen, the air thick with disbelief.
Clara's heart hammered. She didn't know whether she wanted to hear the words or flee before they struck. Ethan's hand tightened on the table's edge, the scar on his cheek standing out under the lamplight. He didn't speak yet, but the weight of the truth was there in his silence, and Clara knew that when it came, it would shatter everything. The hall seemed to lean in, every creak of the floorboards swallowed by silence. Clara sat rigid, her pulse in her ears. William's bride, her face pale, her fingers shaking, turned toward Ethan as though the entire room had melted away. Her voice cracked when she spoke. It was him. "Before you, William. Before all of this."
"I loved him." Gasps cut through the crowd.
Clara's stomach dropped. Her eyes darted to Ethan, who sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with memories he hadn't spoken of. William laughed, sharp and bitter. "Loved him? That scarred recluse? You're a fool to admit such shame on your wedding night." But the bride stood taller now, trembling less with every word.
"I was no fool."
"He was the only man who ever saw me as more than what I could give."
"And I let you..." She choked on the words. "I let you force me into this." Clara's chest ached as she watched.
She hadn't expected pity for the girl who had stolen her place, but seeing the terror in her eyes, hearing the crack in her voice, she couldn't help but feel it. Ethan finally rose, the room holding its breath. His hand brushed against Clara's for a fleeting moment, grounding her before he spoke. His voice was low, steady, and heavy with truth. "She's telling you what you don't want to hear, William, that she didn't choose you, that no matter how fine the ring or how loud the feast, you can't chain a woman's heart." William's face darkened, his pride burning hotter than his temper. He slammed his glass down so hard it shattered, red wine splashing like blood across the table. You dare shame me, both of you, before my own guests? The bride's tears spilled freely now, but her voice didn't waver. Shame yourself, William. You think you won tonight. But all you've done is trap yourself in a lie. Clara's breath came shallow. She saw Ethan's hand curl into a fist at his side, not in anger, but in restraint. His eyes flicked to her, steady, searching, as if asking whether she was ready to hear more. And in that glance, Clara knew something else lived beneath the confession. Something deeper, something that bound them all together in ways she hadn't yet begun to understand. The music had long died, the guests unsure whether to stay or flee, yet no one dared move. William stood trembling with rage, but his bride had already slipped her hand from his, stepping closer to Ethan instead. Clara's throat tightened. Every word felt like a stone dropping into her chest as the truth unfolded. "I loved him first," the bride whispered, her eyes on Ethan. "But I was too weak. I let my father sell me off to William's name. And when Ethan didn't fight for me, I thought he'd forgotten."
"I see now. He didn't. He just carried the weight alone." Ethan's jaw flexed.
He turned slightly and his eyes found Clara, soft, steady, pleading for her to understand. His voice cracked as he said, "I never forgot."
"I just thought I'd lost the right to choose. Until you, Clara. You showed me I wasn't cursed to walk alone anymore." Clara's tears spilled hot down her cheeks.
Her chest ached, torn between the confession that rattled the room and the sincerity in Ethan's voice meant only for her. William lunged, but half the men in the hall restrained him, their loyalty swaying as truth rang louder than wealth. He spat curses, but his bride only turned her back to him, no longer trembling. The hall erupted then, some in whispers, some in shouts, but Clara barely heard them. She only saw Ethan standing raw and unshielded, offering her a heart-scarred, but still beating for her. Slowly Clara stepped forward. Her hand reached for his, her voice shaking but clear. "Then let's walk together."
"No more past haunting us. No more lies." The weight broke, and Ethan dropped his hat to the floor, pulling her into his arms.
The hall gasped, but for Clara the noise faded away. All that remained was the man who had stood through storms of shame and the vow he silently pressed into her hair, that he would make her smile, not someday, but every day forward.